Oh, welcome back. It's only been a week or so since you've seen us last. We're still sitting in the same position. We don't wear the same clothes all the time. We just haven't left. But we're here for the second session of the saga of railroading in the Northern Tier. Peg Barcomb, Bob Venne here, your host for What's Going On, and we're continuing the story of the Rutland Railroad Company. I hope everybody out there is enjoying it, and if you are and you haven't remembered to put your VCR on, why don't you do that right now and call your friends and neighbors again, because they'll want to see this, I'm sure. Go ahead, Peg. We're right back where we started with last time. We had pictures up here of the man on the horse.
Yes. Well, in 1890, there was a bad famine, ice famine. There was a drought, and they called it the ice famine. There was a bad drought in New York City and Philadelphia, and there was no ice. They couldn't get ice. So up in this area, of course, there was plenty of ice. So they started cutting ice, and all the railroads and any man that wanted to come and help cut ice or put ice into the railroad cars was hired. And even the Indians from Caughnawaga came, and they loaded sometimes 50 to 100 boxcar loads of ice in one train and would head down to New York City. And they loaded barges, anything they could get. So ice houses sprang up all over this area, Rouses Point and Champlain area too. So the people thought, well, we're going to store the ice and we'll be able to make a fortune on it another season. But it was a one-season thing. At the end of the next season, the drought was finished, and so a lot of people lost a lot of money, and the ice just stayed melted in the ice houses. And so that was a kind of an interesting year, that there was so much going on, yet it all fell through in 1 year. Now, William Laundry, his son Vernon Laundry, was an engineer on the railroad. He died in 1948 from Rouses Point. He was a call boy. He started out as a call boy on the Rutland.
Well, you got to explain that. It sounds terrible, but go ahead.
Not a call girl.
All right.
Call boy on the railroad. There was not many telephones. So if they hired a young fella, sometimes a schoolboy with a bicycle, and when there was a train being made up and they had to contact the engineer and the fireman and the trainman and so on, they would send a man to the person's house. This boy or man would go and knock on the door and say, "You're called for such and such a time." So he was the call boy.
Okay.
He made the call. And that's what he'd say, "You're called for such and such a time." So he was a call boy. Then he was a telegrapher on the Rutland. Then he was an NJ fireman. And after that, he learned how to repair watches. And he repaired watches, but he was also a railroad watch inspector. Now, a railroad watch inspector, not like my husband was on a section, he didn't have to have a railroad watch, but anybody of the train crew had to have railroad watches. And they had to have, I'm not going to say when, I think it's once a month, but I'm not sure of that. They had to have them inspected, and they would be issued a card, and whoever inspected them would punch the card and sign his initials. And each time they took in the watch to be inspected, they had to have this done. I brought, this belongs to my son. It was my husband's railroad watch.
Can you turn that just here before you open it, Peg?
I'll get this face off and show you. I'll get the face off from it.
She's unscrewing the face that screws on top, and there's a very important reason why she's doing that.
Now, a railroad watch had to be 23 jewels. It had to have seconds marked on it. It had to have a second hand. It had to have numbers like this for the face. It couldn't have Roman numerals. It also had to be lever set. Now this is the lever. Pull it out and then you can see it here. Now I think Calvin can catch that.
There's a little lever right here.
Now in order to get to that lever, you can turn the stem of this watch and you can wind it, but you can't set the hands. You have to take off the face, pull out this lever, set your hands, push the lever back in. That was so if an engineer accidentally might change his watch, even 1 minute, he might run into another train. So he couldn't turn it by the stem unless he took off the face and used this. So this is called a lever set watch. And this, all railroad watches had to be like this.
Do they all have lever sets, or could they have different types of settings, but they had to be set by removing the face or something else?
I don't know of anything
Okay.
other than a lever,
Okay.
because that releases the hands.
So when you talk about a railroad watch, many times they're only pocket watches. They aren't really
No,
railroad
not a
watches.
railroad watch. And as I say, the crew had to have these, and they had to have them inspected regular. And if there was an accident and their inspection slip didn't show it had been done when it was supposed to, well, they were in real big trouble. But this belongs to my son. It was my husband's, and he gave it to him. This is my favorite. I won't open it, but this is an Abe Lincoln railroad watch. It's an Abe Lincoln model, and I love this one. But that's it.
This is an Elgin. The first one she showed us is an Elgin, and this is a. I can't tell. I can't see it right. It's very fancy English writing, and it's not an Elgin. Ingersoll, was it Ingersoll that made a lot of the Waltham?
Yeah,
Waltham.
Ingersoll was never a railroad watch.
Okay. Very fancy, ornate watch.
Illinois Watch Company.
Right today, I believe there's only one watch company left in the United States that makes watches. I think that is Elgin. A lot of pocket watches were made by Elgin, but they are not railroad watches necessarily.
Here you can see what the movements look like in there. This runs perfect. My son's needs cleaning. That's why it's I won't wind it even. But this shows you what the intricate insides of that. But you see, it's an Abe Lincoln.
Right, and then it had to have at least that. And of course, Illinois. That makes sense.
Yeah, but this was an Abe Lincoln model, which I just love that one.
Now they make Ninja Turtle models.
Yes.
In later years, you could get the railroad wristwatch. After my husband was there, in later years, they approved it, and it was lever set too. But you could get a wristwatch. You didn't have to have the pocket watch. They allowed that. So, well, another accident. In Champlain, there was a Sunday excursion train with 700 people on it. It was a Sunday school group, and they had gone over the bridge to Burlington, and they were coming back, and the mail train was to be in Rouses Point shortly, and so the mail train was at the station too. So as the mail train went to pull onto the siding, the excursion train didn't even slow up. It plowed right into the mail train. So there was 3 people killed in that accident, 3 Champlainers. I didn't bring their names. I have it, but I didn't bring them.
That's right at the station,
Right at the
where the siding is.
station.
Oh.
And so there was so many injuries. I got to ask you this. Where is the Champlain Concert Hall?
I have no idea.
Well, that's where they set up for a hospital, in the Champlain Concert Hall. Now, this is out of the newspapers down at the college.
All I can think would be the village hall, the old village hall, but I have no idea.
That's what it called it, Champlain Concert Hall. And doctors from Coopersville and Chazy and Rouses Point and everywhere came, and they kind of set up a hospital there, and they treated everyone. But out of 700 people, only 3 to die with such an accident was really a miracle in itself.
You have to realize, first of all, people out there watching, if you're not that familiar, that going from east to west, there was only 2 rails. And both trains going east and those coming west used the same rails. And you had to meet someplace.
That's why there was these sidings.
And you had sidings, which means that you went beyond where the siding was, and then they would usually back up into a siding on the side. They would switch the tracks, and they would wait there until the train coming from the other direction would go by, then go back on and continue again. And obviously you must know exactly who's coming the other direction at all times, or the surprise of meeting is very, very... In this case here, the train probably just either had not gone on the siding or had not even completed. And
apparently the excursion train was in error because it should have started to slow down much before it got near that station. And if it had been going slower, the mail train would have had time to get on the siding.
I think from the time you leave Rouses Point until you keep going west, you're going uphill all the time.
Yes, you are.
So you're always trying to pick up speed, and you don't want to let up too much because you got to pick it up again. And I know that where Mason's Corners is, the elevation is about 200 feet, and in Rouses Point I think it's 10 or 20. in that area. So you've got to be climbing all the time, and it climbs all the way until you get past Malone, I guess. They keep going up and up. But that could be one reason, but wasn't paying attention for the other.
Yeah. Now, talking about duty and customs and so on, in 1890 there was 4 cars of poultry that came from Ontario that was going to Boston, and F.W. Myers paid $11,000 duty on those 4 cars of poultry.
That's a lot of poultry, yeah? Lots of poultry,
So
you got to be.
That's a lot of money too. I mean, but and then in 1900, the Rutland and Canada Railroad was using the bridge. They paid to go across the bridge because it wasn't their bridge, and they used that bridge to get to Burlington from Rouses Point, and they had to use telephones because they were using the trains, but they didn't have any telegraph in yet. So they started running trains back and forth even before the phones were in. And in 1903, they took down the old Rutland Roundhouse in Rouses Point. Now later we'll show you a blueprint and show you where that roundhouse was. 1936, I remember a Rutland train coming in, and they had a big steel car on it, and they pulled it into a siding, and in that car was a whale. And that whale was 65 feet long, and it weighed 136,000 pounds. And it was pickled somehow, but you still could smell it. It was something to see, but people went, and they did stay very long. I don't know how they had preserved that, but whatever it was, it wasn't. But, you know, to see a whale in Rouses Point.
Pickled with a pretty big bottle.
Yeah, it was some way it was preserved.
I'll be darned, yep.
I went to see it. I remember going to see that. We all went in and saw it, and you walked the length of the car, and I think you paid 10 cents. And you went in to see it and walked the length of it, and then you went out the other end of the car.
I'm sure it was worth looking at.
I guess each place they came to, they stopped and set that car off so people could see what a whale looked like, because you couldn't imagine something
you didn't
like
have
a
TV,
65-foot long whale, you know. So, and then at one point in time, I don't know the year. I looked all over and I couldn't find it. I even called Larry Barnes, who knows more than me, and he didn't know the year either. We called it the old P&O. The Portland and Ogdensburg decided they'd build a bridge right side of the bridge that was already there, and they started to put in the piers at the Rouses Point end and at the Alberg end, and they got some of them in, but before they got too far they ran out of money. And if we had low water, which we don't much anymore, but if we did, there's still some of those piers there that you can still see, some of the piers that from that old road. Then another bad accident. Most of those Favreaux still live right here in Rouses Point or Champlain. Joe Favreau was riding a caboose on the Rutland, and it was a big snowstorm. And an engine was coming along behind, and it plowed right into the caboose. And that man left 9 children. The baby was only 2 months old.
You're talking about the Noel Favreau and Joe Favreau's father, right?
Yes.
In that case, yes.
Henrietta was the
Henrietta
mother.
was the mother, yes. That's
yes.
a very bad accident,
And,
yes.
I mean, 9 children, a 2-month-old baby.
Yes.
That woman was remarkable. She raised that whole family.
Yeah. Didn't Joe still work on the railroad till...
I don't know.
Son, I thought Joe worked...
I didn't know the children that much.
I thought he did, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. I don't know. And in the last few years, the CV and the Rutland were the last owners of the bridge out there. And one year, like my dad, one year he was paid by the Rutland, and his checks came from the Rutland Railroad, and the next year it came from the CV Railroad. And then the next year it went back to the Rutland. So they alternated years. So when the Rutland shut down in '62, the CV routed their trains out over Kantic and went that way because they weren't using the bridge anymore. They were going to take it down. So they just rerouted their trains. And so the bridge was no more. So it was September 18th, 1962 that the Rutland was given permission to abandon the road, and it had been going 119 years when they decided to abandon.
I have a picture, that you mentioned that, it's a good time to mention it right here. And here is a picture of a diesel. It's in a paper called The Banner. It was published by Al Ryan in Rouses Point. Al Sleepy Ryan. His father was in the North Countryman, and he had started this banner. This is May 17th, 1962, number 404, pulling a string of cars picked up at various spots between Rouses Point and Malone, and they think this is the last Rutland engine that will ever pass through Rouses Point. The train was operated by railroad officials as the employees were on strike. The banner photographer was on hand to photograph the sad but undoubtedly historic scene. Right here.
So after they had that, they abandoned, they got a 90-day reprieve. So they went until April 29th of 1963 before they actually did close down. So in 64, the whole Rutland was dissolved, and then the property was sold off, and the rails were pulled as fast as they could, because the more they took down, the less taxes they had to pay. So they hurried up and did as much of that as they could. Now, this is a report, 1899. Now, this is the Rutland report. This is a kind of a rare one.
The report of the directors of the Rutland Railroad Company, the 32nd annual.
And what's so interesting, you take that one and you take this one and you sit down and you compare, you look inside and you compare the dates and the progress and so on of the two. This is the last one.
1964.
This is the very last one, and that one, 1899. But that's interesting reading, to compare the two, like how much materials they had and you know, what they had in then and when they closed down.
Right. This isn't only statistics in here. It's written in narrative form.
I think there's
also,
a map too.
yeah, there's a map up front.
Of the whole system.
The system up in here, all folded up.
Yeah. I don't open those old ones very often because they're old and I'm always afraid to tear them. Now this is a public timetable, an employee public timetable of 1943 of the Rutland. It's just a souvenir, you know. This is an employee timetable. Now ask me the difference.
All right, yeah. What? Is this only when the employees ride the rail?
These are only the employees' timetable. The other one is the public. That tells for the public when the trains got. But this, every employee has to have these. The instructions in there are different than what it is in the. So this is an employee timetable.
Okay,
that is a public timetable.
This is April 1960, and the public was
43.
43.
Now this is a picture that. See, this is the Rutland magazine. Maybe you want to show the cover first.
Called the Rutland Newsliner. And
1953.
This was May and June of 53.
See, every month, each railroad sent their employees a little booklet or a magazine, something, every month, or a newspaper. And this one was done of what the Rutland people got. This was their monthly magazine.
We'll take a short break here. We got a telephone call coming in. Stand by. We'll be right back. You're watching What's Going On Here.
Mm-hmm.
The picture you see on your screen are the communities along the road, the Rutland Road from Ogdensburg to Rouses Point, New York, starting with Ogdensburg, Lisbon, Madrid, Norwood, Naps, Windsor and Brazier, North Lawrence, Marara, Brushton, Bangor, Malone Junction, Burke, Chateauguay, Churubusco, Clinton Mills, Ellenburg, Forest, the big community of Forest, Irona, Altona, Woods Falls, Moore's Forks, Moore's Junction, Champlain, and Rouses Point, all on that New York side, the Rutland Railroad. Good close-up for you to see of all the stops. All of that is gone by the board, folks. And now back to Peg Barcomb and this week's show.
Well, what he just read was taken out of the 1943 Rutland timetable. Now we're back to this. This is the Newsliner magazine that the Rutland puts out, and once a month their employees all did get a copy of this magazine to tell them what was going on along the line. And this picture is men from Rouses Point, so I thought it was kind of interesting. It's the 1953 copy of it. There's Pat Patnode, Fred Durbridge, Mickey Obry, Lee Poisson, and Al Cagey. They were all men that were in this picture that are locals. All of us know who they were.
Now this mentions the hay lift operation is a success at Rouses Point. Apparently in the early part of 1953 there was a drought and there was not enough feed for the animals and the cattle down in the southeast and I think it's Georgia and South Carolina. So some 50 to 60 loads of hay came in from Canada by truck. This is in front of the Rouses Point 9B custom station, and they all went over to the railway yard where there were 45 open cars ready to take the hay to ship down to the southeastern part of the United States in this Operation Hay Lift. All part of this Rutland Newsletter story in 1953.
Now this is a letter. It's Calvin doesn't have to pick this up probably. It's a letter of 1959. It's CN Railroad, and it tells that the World of Mirth train is going to come through, and it weighs 3,100 ton. I thought it was a kind of an interesting
circus, in other words, the World of Mirth.
Oh yes, and it also says that the customs will board at Ottawa, and the immigration will get on at Kantic. This was one of the inner office letters.
And copies going to Buckland, Keith, Clifford, Devine, London, Bruce, Costello, I don't know if that's our Costello, and Mr. Messier, the agent at Rouses Point. He was from Champlain, I believe, right?
Yes, he was more agent in Champlain than Rouses Point.
And his wife, I believe his widow still lives up on Oak Street here in Champlain.
But that was just a kind of an interesting... this is a Rutland Railroad stock certificate. Just an interesting piece.
It's a keepsake, or otherwise, if you had a lot of these, you could paper your wall. It's about all they're worth today, except for no, they're worth more than that, of course, for people who like history.
Oh, people that collect them. There's people that do nothing but collect railroad stocks and things like that. They're real collectible items. But I like the old engine.
Yes. The engine on the emblem here in the middle. And remember that we'll be hearing more about the cow catcher. This grill work in the front is called a cow catcher. Can you tell us anything about a cow catcher, Peg?
Well, I may as well tell you now. You keep talking about it. That's bugging you.
I like the cow catcher.
Well, I believe it really was named a cow catcher for the simple reason there was a lot of cows on the tracks in the olden days. There wasn't so many fences, and of course the railroad was a new thing, so the rails weren't fenced in, so the cows were on the tracks. The cow catcher was in the front of the engine. It was an iron grill work, and it went low to the rails so that if they hit a cow or hit anything, it wouldn't go under the train. The cow catcher would keep it in the front of the engine until they could stop. So I think that's why it was called cow catcher. I'm not positive of that, but I believe that is the reason it was.
I've been waiting 2 weeks to find out about that, and now I know it.
Now this is a timetable. I'm not going to show you that. I'm going to show you this. Orville McKnight was a very good friend of mine, and he died when he was 81 years old, not too long ago. He was from the Moores area, and he loved the railroad. And he took it upon himself. He made 14 of these books. And he put them all together. He did the typing. You can look through. He put the pictures in it, did the whole thing, just as a labor of love, really. And he put his stories of his work on the railroad, when he worked on the railroad. He gave one to Moore's Library. He gave one to Champlain Library. And of course I got mine, but I got to know him real well. And we used to correspond. But to think that the work to make 14 copies of a book like that, you've got to love railroad.
You typed them all, right?
Yes.
These are all originals.
Yes, and I don't believe any of the books have the same pictures. He tried to put different pictures in each of the books he made, you know. And but that to me that's worth a lot of money, because just to think that he did that and gave it to me, you know.
We mentioned Moore's Junction. You got to remember that the railroad in Moore's was, if you knew where the shirt factory was, Maple Street and Depot Street. That was known as Moore's Junction, and that train station burned, I guess, and then someone was hired to clear out the basement, because the basement didn't burn, and they pulled out tons of paper and memorabilia, and Mr. Matat over in West Shazy has a lot of that, and he's trying to sell some of that for any of you people who are looking at the memorabilia.
I went through the Champlain station. We had got permission, and we went to Champlain station, and I was sure somebody was going to call the cops. We went there at night, and we used flashlights because there was no more electricity, but I had permission to go and pick up any paperwork that was left because the railroad was all done. So I got a lot of paperwork from out of there. And in Rouses Point, I called Rutland and asked if I could go in and if there was anything left. And he said, well, yes, you can. You have permission. And I said, but there's a lock on the door. And he said, do you have a hammer? and I said, yes. So he just said no more. So he couldn't tell me, go there if I got hurt, but there was nothing more they wanted. He had said everything they wanted was out of there. So I got lots of things, rubber stamps and things like that from the Rouses Point station.
Aren't those the letters from Soup? Soup letters?
I
think they are.
I think they could be.
You know, it used to be
Alphabet Soup.
Alphabet Soup, and we used to make little nameplates and so forth, and I think those were some of Alphabet Soup letters that are on the front of this little book called Moore's Junction.
He must have been 78 years old or something when he made those books. He was really
all
quite
original,
old,
terrific.
Yeah. Now these, before we get to the D&H, I'll show you these few things. This is what some of us do for Christmas cards. We take our favorite picture and we have them put on. This is a Rutland doubleheader, which is my pet. The other one is a CN.
Now he's staying doubleheader because you'll notice there's two engines, one behind the other.
And that's taken just before you would get on the diamond in Rouses Point.
Well, explain what a diamond is, Peg, to us.
Let's skip it till we get to D&H and we'll show you.
All right.
I think showing you will be better than trying to tell you.
All right.
Now this is a CN. I'm just showing you random pictures. This is a CN. Not too long ago, up until not too long ago, they used to have steam excursion trains, and Oral Parsons always went. And this is one of the excursion trains coming out of a tunnel, a CN train in Canada. And when you went on the excursion train, the train would let you off, let all the people off with their cameras, and then the train would back up. And after it got backed up quite a long ways, it would really bellow out the old black smoke and it'd come ahead fast. So all the people there with their cameras could get pictures. Those trains used to be really a lot of fun, but the people that rode them was really something. Now this is it's not the best picture, but anyway. This fella is Rudy Morgenfrew, and he owns a private railroad car called the Clover Colony. And he'd come up to Rouses Point with that railroad car, and I was privileged to go inside and see the inside of it. And there was everything, it was right up to date. There's the brass fixtures and everything in there just like it had been. And him and I are exchanging railroad dishes, china dishes. I traded him a D&H for a Feather River. But that's another part of railroading. If you collect, you trade with everybody. You get to know all the collectors and the traders. And
you know, your memory and your knowledge of this, Peg, astounds me.
Well, I've been a railroad nut for years.
Yeah, you've got to remember all these names and this man.
Well, he's a friend. I mean,
well, that's
you know,
true. That
so
is true.
It's not just somebody in passing. And in Railroad Magazine, I used to run an ad and say that I would trade railroad items with people. And a man from Pennsylvania sent that to me. It's a Pennsylvania Railroad switch key, but notice all the little bumps around the outside of the edge.
Up on the round part.
Right on the round part. There's all little bumps on that brass key. And I didn't know why, and I found out later, all those like that were not switch keys, they were station keys. And they all had that. If they didn't have that, they were regular switch keys out on the line.
I imagine with that on there, you could tell when you're looking through and you could find the one you wanted right away, right?
Imagine.
It's an identification.
And this was one of my favorite treasures. That is a CV lantern, but look at the way it's made. It's twisted wire. It's two strands of wire, all twisted.
On the bottom here,
Yeah.
so if you can see
The
that.
frame is twisted wire.
Yeah, it's a twisted wire that is two together.
Two together to make the framing.
It's 2/3 of a braid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But to me, that fascinated me. I liked that. That was a... Now this is 3 conductors' lanterns. They're all Rutland. They're owned by George Cutler. George Cutler lives in Rutland, Vermont, and he was a vice president or something of the Rutland Road. And he has these, well, he doesn't anymore, but he did. He had these in his home. They were part of his collection. And I bought from him a Rutland Railroad knife. He had two. There was only 2 diners on the whole Rutland Railroad. So dining china from their cars was very, very rare. And he had 2 knives. So I bought a table knife from him. But these were some of his conductor's lanterns.
But you can see that this has a handle, and that has a handle that you carry or put over your arm. This one has a built-up arm hole, right, that you can put your arm in and carry it in your arm rather than in your hand itself.
That's 3 of the oldest conductor's lanterns.
And remember, the conductor is the master, the boss of a train, right?
And each conductor bought his own lantern.
I didn't know that.
They didn't use railroad lanterns, each one. And they even had their names on the globes, some of them. They even had their names. And in the real old ones, I had one 1851, and if you broke the globe, you had to unsolder the lantern to change the globe. There was no way to get the globe out. You had to unsolder the whole lantern.
As you look at these, the common one is the kind you see more is the one on the left, the red, or the amber, I guess it's red. The other 2 are very, very unusual, right? They're the oldest.
But the pattern of the lanterns is so different. This is another friend, an engineer in England, in Yorkshire, England, Dennis Flood. I like that picture because look how the divided windshield with the windshield wipers.
Yeah, you can
Now
see.
our engines don't have a windshield like that. But
Ours are much shorter, huh?
Yeah. But that is comes to a point and it's divided. Well, that's an English engine. It's another friend. But see,
Yeah.
I have friends all over because once you get into this collecting, if you start trading, I've got lanterns from Scotland that I traded in Scotland, in different places. But I bought classification lights from a steam engine out in Oregon. But with the postage today, there's no way you could have afforded to send them. When I got them, postage wasn't much, but they look just like a diver's bell on an old steam engine. There's
Right.
one on each corner.
Peg, what is it? What's the distance between the 2 rails called? There's a name.
Standard.
The standard. Now, I think in England it's different than ours, correct?
Yeah.
Our engine would not fit on theirs.
No.
It's wider. This is a wider
Yeah,
span
it's a wider.
than we have in the United
The
States.
United States uses standard. We
Right.
used to use narrow gauge,
And
but now we use
Right,
standard.
and then when you go to another country in Europe, they'll change. So you don't. It's that's why you can't use your train, I guess, in their country. You got to switch over onto their engines and their cars.
This picture, I don't know if it's going to mean anything to any of you. I love it. You know the old wooden bridge in Swanton, the wooden railroad bridge? Well, this was taken when the sun was shining on that bridge, and it was taken from the end of the bridge, and you see all the sun shining through the timbers.
All the timbers.
But I thought that was the most
That's in
fascinating
Swanton.
picture. Yes,
It was
it's
in
long
Swanton.
gone.
When you arrive into Swanton and you stop at the light just as you cross the railroad tracks, if you went straight about a quarter to a half a mile, it was on the left and it crossed the water. It was one of the longest covered bridges for railroad in the United States, and someone set it afire a couple of years ago.
That was the St. Johnsbury Railroad.
And it's
that.
an absolute sin
But
that is done.
I thought that with the light shining through there was kind of a fascinating
Very
shot.
much so. It looks like... now, just a few things, and we're finished with the Rutland Railroad. I wanted to show you just a couple pictures that I picked out here. This is a picture of the Rouses Point Bridge with the iron bridge and the train going across it, taken, I guess, from the south. That happens to be in this book on the Rutland Railroad. All right. And another one here. This is in Moore's Junction, Moore's Forks, when it used to cross just beyond the bridge, when it crossed over the bridge, just as you leave Moore's Forks. A picture, that's the only picture we've got of, we had one other one of Moore's Forks. And this is an interesting set of pictures here of a private parlor car that was owned by Mr. Webb. I can remember his name, J. Watson, son of Dr. Webb himself. And their home, he married a Vanderbilt, and they own the land where the Shelburne Museum is. and there's a great big mansion up there, and this was his private parlor car.
You know the name of it?
The car? The Weber. No, I'm guessing.
Nihasani.
Hasani.
That's the name of his private car.
That must mean something. Maybe the initials of his
Indian.
kids? Oh,
Indian.
all right. This is another picture of crossing at Rouses Point. You see all of the pilings on the side. Are those by chance that other railroad you were talking about? No, I was
No,
just about.
no.
And this is where it's crossing, and you can see all the superstructure underneath it. Another one of the Rutland. This is the picture of strictly a picture of a snowplow.
You wanted to show that car with the wheels.
Yes, this is a snowplow that goes ahead and plows the road, and then on the side, these will also plow, and you can plow 30, 40 feet across so that your train won't rise off the track. What I wanted to show you here was this car in the bottom, which is on rubber tires, but they have mounted in the front and the back railroad type wheels, so they can ride on the rails to get to another spot as if you were driving the car. The other picture I had here was a picture of a turntable where you bring an engine on, and then in this little building right in here they have a motor, and they actually physically turn that whole engine around and face it to what is known as the roundhouse, and you see 3 sets of tracks going into the roundhouse where they do repairs, cleaning, greasing, and so forth. And it's kind of important to talk about this now because of all the news in the paper in this November, the 29th of November, about the roundhouse and the turntable and those 54 acres in Rouses Point, which everybody seems to want. The village, the town of Champlain, the village of Rouses Point, and now the LDC is very interested for a industrial park. Here's another shot of the
You mentioned a trip there too. We'll be showing the Rouses Point around.
Oh yes, that's one of our other. We've already done it. And let me just finish this here, and I'll tell you about that. But here is some more of the superstructure underneath, all the wooden that holds the rails, and there's your 4 rails again that Peg so brought out to us and showed us. And here's just another shot. And here's a shot of, we're going to hear later, the Diamond crossing where the 2 trains cross. The Rutland coming across this way and a D&H going the other way, and never the twain shall meet right there or you're in trouble.
They have.
They have. And this is the Ogdensburg-Rutland Railroad Station here, and this is a scene just outside of the village of Champlain on the track. That's it for here. We want to remind you that you're watching What's Going On Here. I'm Bob Venne. Our guest for this week and for last week was Peg Barcomb, the historian for the town of Champlain. We're going to be right back, and we're going to tell you what else you're going to see in the coming weeks on this episodes on the railroads, the romance of railroading in the northern tier. The expression. We just showed you those pictures in the book of Rutland, and we mentioned the roundhouse, and we want to tell you that yesterday, a little out of sequence, we spent well over an hour in the roundhouse and the roundhouse area and the turntable area with a very interesting gentleman by the name of Thomas Rosenberg, right. He was Rosenberger. Yeah. He was very, very kind to us, and he did an excellent job, and we want to thank him again, and make sure you tune in. I think it'll be next week, or the week after, and we'll have more. We'll have that whole trip, and that's nearly a session in itself. And we saw a lot of the tools. We went into cabooses, and we did a lot of things. And he worked for the D&H for over 35 years, and very interesting gentleman. And you're going to like to see that also. But getting back to not only today, but the past, way back again now. We're starting on the segment, which is the rest of this program on, and maybe into next, on the D&H, the Delaware and Hudson.
We'll do like we did in the Rutland. We'll be cutting in with others as we go along, but
Good.
It's going to be mostly D&H. Just a note, I'm using D&H railroad telegraph paper for my notes.
Right.
It's not D&H, it's telegraph paper, but when I went to Rutland, when the Rutland was selling out, they had a whole bunch of these pads, and they were selling them for nearly nothing, so I bought a bunch. They make great scrap paper, but today a telegraph is something
Yep.
too.
Telegram today, they just don't happen much anymore, do they?
No, they
just
call
don't
up on the phone and tell you
And
you
the-
have a message.
Yep, and a fax or something.
But these,
yep.
they were delivered, so, but
Yep.
that's what I use
Scrap paper.
for scrap paper. Well, we'll start off with 1845. That's when John Myers of Rouses Point, he was an agent he came here in 1845 from Burlington. He was an agent on the Canada and St. Lawrence Railroad for 15 years. Then he resigned to start the F.W. Myers brokerage in 1860 in Rouses Point. He had a son, Francis. Francis was a conductor on the Champlain and St. Lawrence Railroad. He joined his father in later years, and then his son John, Francis's son John R., came to the firm in 1908. In 1925, he was the president. Now, John R. and Walter Witherby from Port Henry built the NJ Railroad, and they sold it to the D&H in 1906. So this is down through the Casey family and the Myers family, and this through there.
Now, Mrs. Casey was a Myers. That's how the Casey family got involved with the Myers, I believe. I believe that Mrs. Roster Casey's father was John Myers, or in the Myers family. And that's how the Caseys became into the F.W. Myers company.
Well, I know there's a connection, but
The mother was mine.
Yes, Mrs. Casey was the Myers, right?
well, I didn't know
Okay.
that part of it. I don't get into
And-
genealogy, so that I didn't know. I knew there was a connection, but as to how it was, I wasn't sure. At the same time, the D&H bought the NJ. They bought the QM&S.
QM&S,
Yeah, Quebec, Montreal, Southern.
okay.
So that was in Canada too, but that linked them right up to the border by getting the NJ and connecting it to the QM&S into Montreal. They ended up with a line from Montreal right through to the border. So that was the reason to get that. Now this is just a couple of NJ waybills. It's nothing great, but it's train orders, I mean. This is what the engineer is handed when he gets on his train. This is just some of the train orders. The one on the back is 1948. I don't know what they
Now,
are.
the NJ is still in existence, is still 100% owned, at least as of right now, by the D&H. And the president is Ray Beaumier from Lacole, and we talked to him already, and you'll be seeing him for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes on one of our later segments, talking about the NJ and seeing the building up there and talking some more about railroading just north of the border and how it ties in with the D&H.
Now, talking about that Francis Myers was a conductor on the Champlain and St. Lawrence. There's a copy of a timetable from the Champlain and St. Lawrence. You see the date.
Yeah, 1853, something very difficult. There aren't many of these around, folks, and if they are, they're in the hands of collectors. And if they aren't, they should be. If you see some of these around, you've got somebody who would be
Real
interested in
collector's
getting
item.
it. Yes.
Yes.
Timetable number 3, Montreal, La Prairie, St. John's, and Rouses Point. And the same thing here, going south, going north. And 1853, Champlain and St. Lawrence.
So 1825, the D&H Canal Company organized, and they started a road from Honesdale, Pennsylvania to the mines. Now this is the starting of the building of that railroad. This is an official D&H picture right out of the D&H building. So I know it's a true one. They finished that line in 1829. And the first locomotive on the continent was the Sturbridge Lion. And that was built in England for the D&H Canal Company. Now this, I don't know how Calvin's going to do this, but I think he can. This is a stamp that shows the Sturbridge Lion that I just told you they bought. This I have to tell you about. Tom
Right.
Rosenberger can tell you the year of that. I can't remember. I should, but I don't want to say it wrong. But this shows you what the Sturbridge Lion looked like on the stamp is an exact, that's what it really looked like.
That was the tender behind it, being
Yeah.
pulled.
and that made its maiden voyage of 3 miles on August 8th, 1829. But it proved that it was too heavy for the wooden rails. So because it was too heavy, they didn't use it anymore.
Wooden rails.
It had wooden rails. So up at the roundhouse in Rouses Point, they built our own, leave it there for the bottom
okay.
picture. They built our own Sturbridge Lion for a 4th of July parade. And at the bottom, that's our Sturbridge Lion.
That's covered up, or this one?
That picture you see.
That one there?
Yeah,
That was
that's it.
ours here.
Now, Bill Thompson was the shop foreman at the D&H at that time. Tom Rosenberger built this engine
Oh, we know about that.
with Marvin and Danny LeBombard and John Quain. Now, I just loved it. I was fascinated by it. They used a 55-gallon drum for the boiler. They used a length of stovepipe for the stack. They used a juice can for the vent, the smoke vent.
There.
The tender was the second seat out of the yard switcher, and they borrowed it. And plus a set of wheels from the shop grease cart, roundhouse grease cart,
Right
they used
here.
for the wheels. Another set off a utility cart for the other set of wheels, plus some rods and wood forms and cotter keys. They put that together. The bottom grating was a running board from the top of a boxcar. And then they painted it shiny black, and they took the stencils and stenciled the name right on it with a stencil. Now, they worked 60 hours to make that, and it was in the parade. And I thought, looking so much like the original one, they really did a fantastic job. So I wrote to Bruce Sturzing, because I talked to the boys, John Quain and so on, and asked if it was going to be kept. And they said, well, there was so many things they borrowed that had to be returned, that they needed. So I wrote to Bruce Sturzing and asked if there was any way that it could be preserved. It would be so great. But there was just too many things that they needed. He said, if they could come up with spare parts to use for something, and still keep it together, but it never developed. But I thought that was really an effort now for those railroad men to build that.
Right, and who is Bruce Sturgeon?
Bruce Sturzing was the president of the railroad. He was, I call him Bruce Sturzing. He's a friend.
Okay.
So I forget when people are friends not to call him.
Okay.
He's president. Now, the canal company, when they started off, was based in New York City. Their main offices and everything was in New York City. But in 1906, they rented the top floor of a building in Albany at 32 Nassau Street. Now, you can see the top floor belongs to D&H, but this was just rented. So
This shows the Albany and Susquehanna down here, and they
Yeah.
had the top floor.
Yeah, it was a building that they rented out, and this was on Nassau Street. And so in 1913, the D&H bought land in Albany, and they paid $750,000 for it. And they started the D&H building. Now, this is another engine that belongs to the canal company before it became D&H. It's one of the old engines. You see a good cow catcher on that
I
one.
see a good cow catcher. And you remember, right here in the division, that's the tender, this is the engine. Two sets of small wheels in the front, and then two big drive wheels behind that. And many times there's more wheels behind that separate.
So the D&H started the D&H building,
Oh, yes.
which is this beautiful building.
Right at the bottom of State Street, just
Now-
down from the Capitol.
It was 12 stories high, the center, and each wing had 5 stories, each side wing. It fronted 664 feet on State Street. That was finished in 1918. Now, I wonder how many people have ever went by that D&H building and noticed the weather vane. I'll bet not many. Well, that land, where that is exactly where Henry Hudson landed in 1609 with his boat, the Half Moon. Now, here is the weather vane.
Made in the shape of a, oh, okay, there's the boat.
Now, that is the weather vane that's on top of the D&H building. Now, I'll tell you about that. I'll tell you how I got it in the first place. I saw a picture of it, and I wrote to Bruce, and I said, what do you have on that weather vane? And Tommy Coach, who was a man that worked in Rouses Point, he had one arm. He knocked at my door one night and he had an envelope, and in the envelope was this picture. After I inquired, he sent this picture. Now, that boat is 6 foot, 9 inches long. Now, this is on top of a 12-story building. It's 8 foot, 10 inches high. The beam is 2 foot. The hull is 5 foot, 2 inches. The main mast is 7 foot, 4 inches. It weighs 780 pounds. The wind area is 16 square feet. The mast head is 264 feet above grade. Now, you tell me how they got it up there.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as a helicopter.
No.
I wouldn't think. I don't know when helicopters came about, but it doesn't seem by 1918 that they had helicopters.
No.
So how would they get that on top of that building?
I think they start from the top and build down.
They must. But I still to find out, someone probably that does these things knows how they would have got it up there, but 780 pounds up on top of there, and it's
crane from different
that
sections.
probably was. It probably was
They
a
have to
crane.
have a ramp some way
Yeah.
or something. You know, while you're telling us this, Peg, I'm reminded that, you know, all this information that you have in various places, probably you've never put down in a concise pattern so anyone could read it or do anything else. And what a historical document that we are making right here for the records of the town, for our records, anybody out there, of all your information that we could have in one spot, and it just don't disappear. You're not going to be here forever any more than I am.
No.
And this is going to be in one spot, and I'm so pleased that you're doing this with us.
Well, I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy talking about it, so it's a pleasure for me to be asked to do it.
I never would have believed that you enjoy this. All right, back to the...
I'll tell you one more thing about the half moon. It's lubricated with graphite, so that it doesn't
Turns
have
with
to.
the wind.
Yes, it turns on graphite, so that there's no. You don't have to get up there and oil it. And Sturzing had said too. Bruce Sturzing said that often people would think that was the Capitol, and people would go in and say, "Well, is this
Yep,
the
yeah,
Capitol?"
beautiful
Because
building.
such a gorgeous building.
You're right.
Now it belongs to the State College.
I remind you, at the top of this building, right here, that's the Albany, in Albany, the D&H building. Very demanding building when you look at it, right at the base of State Street.
And a lot of the downstairs offices were rented to other railroads they had in there. And they had one room in there, the D&H trophy room. It was a big room, and they had all the trophies that the D&H teams had ever won, and they're all inside there. It's really an interesting building.
I don't remember the name of the street that passes right in front, straight up is State Street. The one that passes in front goes out to Waterville, and that way, and down the road toward Waterville is where the actual station is, where
Yes,
you get
yes.
into and out of the trains. This is the administration building more, rather than the station, is that correct?
Yeah,
Right.
this is the
Yeah,
offices. This
okay,
is not the
all the
station.
offices.
This is the D&H building. Yeah. All of the things that, I went up on the 12th floor, and you'd never believe the scenes that you can see looking out over the whole city, and that is fabulous.
And then the river is behind it,
The
correct?
river's behind it. That's where Henry Hudson come in,
Right.
up to that. But the view from the 12th floor is out of this world. It's really, you could stay there an hour and just look around.
Is that still owned by the D&H?
No, the college owns it.
Oh,
It's
okay.
State College. See, when they got so small, they didn't need a building that size, so they just moved their things over to Oneonta and their offices, and very limited now. So then 1852, the Plattsburgh and Montreal built a line, and they went from Plattsburgh to Moore's Junction. And when they got there, they crossed the northern railroad over into Canada. That line went bankrupt, so it reorganized as the Montreal and Plattsburgh. And the D&H reached Plattsburgh November 29th, 1875. And in 1876, the D&H went to West Shazy and then on down to Rouses Point using the other rail lines, but D&H still came into Rouses Point 1876.
First time.
Yeah,
Before that, you went to Moore's Junction and then continued north.
yeah.
And that Rouses Point was not involved.
No. So 1879, that we'll get to that a little later.
Okay.
1879, the D&H station burned, and this is not it. There was no picture of the first station, but it burned, and they lost the tickets, the books, everything. They lost the whole business. So they used an old boxcar for a station, and the village, in the village minutes, it says that the village donated the land to build this station, that they donated that to the railroad so they could build this station.
Previous station was on a different...
It was on the site of the first Delaware Hotel. It was not railroad land. It was a Delaware Hotel, which was privately owned, was on that site.
Where was that?
And just south of where it is today, the other side of
Where
Pratt
Arnold
Street.
lives, at that house?
Closer
just
to the track.
Closer to the track?
Closer to the street, I mean,
All right,
closer
so
to
it's
Pratt
south
Street.
of Pratt Street.
So after it burned on the site of the first Delaware house, the village gave this land and they built it on the opposite side of Pratt Street. But notice the little park. There's a little park there.
Yeah, right on the corner, yeah.
And the street light, real fancy street light.
Right. That's not the street light, I beg your pardon. Here's the street light right down here.
Let me see.
I see it now, it's down here. I thought I was looking at something up above.
Yeah, it's right
Yes,
here.
I see that now, yes.
But that was must have shown a lot of light.
Beautiful color in the building.
And notice that there's 4 baggage cars in that picture. That shows you how much
That's,
baggage and
yes.
suitcases and mail and stuff that they must have had to use
Yes.
for a train to have 4 cars.
We've been there for 2 days and haven't seen any. I don't think we got any left at all.
No,
These are the
there's none
baggage
left.
cars that you'd unload and put on and bring into the station or out to wherever you were going to go with it. But these were baggage cars. When you were at Oral Parchman's house, we saw one of those at the base of his stairway in his basement. He has a big one.
Larry Marnes has one.
Larry
too.
Marnes has one
Yes.
too. We hope to get to Larry Marnes in the spring. Do a story with
Now,
his
in that
equipment.
station, the last full-time janitor that was there was Raymond Moore. Now, he took such pride in that station. The windows were always sparkling, and he'd put this pine dust on the floor every morning, and if you went to take the train, everything was sparkling clean, and the benches were dusted, and it makes you feel sick when you go and look at the station today. But it was really kept right up. And he took care of the station, and he took care of the baggage room, and he checked the baggage. This was his jobs, janitor and baggage man.
We're going to take a short break here, but before we do, I want to mention something that I got out of the Delaware and Hudson book. This is back in 1869. A man by the name of Richards was working for the Delaware and Hudson, doing some building down in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, down near the bottom of the D&H area, and his wife was coming over from Ireland, and she had 5 children. And on the train, on the trip to Carbondale, her labor started, and they decided they better pull over onto a siding. A doctor was summoned, and they made a maternity ward out of the car, and twin girls were born. And when they got to Carbondale, Mr. Richards found out he had a wife and 7 kids rather than a wife and 5 kids, and the twin girls were named Dinah Delaware and Catherine Hudson Richards. Their middle names became Delaware and Hudson, which I thought is very interesting. There's Mrs. Richards and the twin girls right here in the story of the D&H. And we'll be right back to you. Bob Venne, you're watching what's going on here, and I'm very pleased today to have as our guest again Peg Barcomb, historian and a railroader from way back, and at least her records are way back. She's not from very far back, and we're going to be right back. Well, welcome back to the Delaware and Hudson. Bob Venne with Peg Barcomb, as we mentioned before we cut. Now we're back again, and back to the railroad, Peg.
Well, I got to pick up on your story of the babies. There was also a baby coming from Montreal to Rouses Point, born on the train, and that baby was the first baby to be baptized in the Presbyterian Church in Rouses Point. One of the ministers that was there told me that was in their records.
That's Washington Avenue,
yes.
In Rouses Point.
Yeah, so
Just celebrated, by the way, their 100th anniversary, so we know, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
And November 20th, Calvin did a
Yeah.
show there, and that was shown, I think, about a week ago. They had a special. Jeff Lees was in and
Yes.
had a concert, and
Now shows the station, again, the D&H station, but it also shows the next building is the National Express Company. That was their building, which is today belongs to Derringer's.
now at one time with Railway Express. That a later name for the National
That was the
Express.
first name.
The National was the first.
Express Company.
And then
you called
Excuse
Railway
me,
Express.
you got names in here? I was going to mention, you got names, go ahead.
Well, I know of Joe Pepin, Fred Duprat, and Jack McCaffrey. Now maybe you know somebody
No,
else.
Josette LeBlanc worked there with Derringer, but she was in the building all the time when Railway Express was there, when I worked for Customs back in the early 60s. And very active building. Mr. Connolly worked in there most of the time. Mr. Halstead worked in there. Bob Halstead, Walter Conley, they all were in there, and that was their main function, was in that yard area.
Then the next building is Beauvin's, which you mentioned Josette. Well, this was Josette's father and Josette LeBlanc today. That was her father and mother's home, and they had a restaurant in the front. And Beauvin's restaurant was very famous. Everybody went in there. Home-cooked meals, home pies, homemade soup, everything. It was a great place. So they had that there for years until Mr. Beauvin died, and then later on that was the Beauvin restaurant.
Now, that building is gone today. The Railway Express, the National Express, is still there, and of course the railway, the station itself is still there.
Now this is it's the station again, but it shows the horses with the horse carriages waiting for the passenger trains to take the people to the hotels. Now the Windsor and the Holland and all, Massachusetts House, they all hired someone. Jack Taylor was one of Jackie's Ceramics, her father-in-law, was one of the men that drove these teams, and they'd pick up the baggage and the passengers and take them to the hotel. Because we had so many hotels, everybody was out to try to get as many people as they could, so they'd send transportation to bring them to the hotel.
So that was their own...
The hotel's rig, and they paid the man, and they had the horse and all.
Well, you mentioned one name I never heard of before, the Massachusetts. Where was the Massachusetts? What was that?
Another story.
Okay, well...
The Massachusetts House was right where Myers Building is across from the liquor store. The F.W. Myers Building, not the corner one, the middle one.
Yes.
That was where the Massachusetts House was. A woman named Mrs. Russell brought that house across the ice and the snow from Hemingford in the winter. It was pulled across, brought to Rouses Point, and set there, and it was a hotel, and it was a Massachusetts House. So when they wanted to build the Myers Building, they moved that and put it, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Sclair's house.
Yes.
All right. Well, they
That's
moved
State
it.
Street.
Yes, they moved it to where Dr. Sclair's house ended up. It became the Arlington, and it was run by Steve Casava and his wife. It burned. When it burned, that was my father, took it all down and sold all the parts, the bathtubs and the sinks and everything that could be sold out of it. He got it for salvage. And so it came down. And then they put the Dr. Sclair's house there, but that was the Massachusetts House.
We hope you people in Chazy and Moores and Champlain are enjoying these sidelights too. Certainly the people from Rouses Point hearing about these interesting little side stories here about Rouses Point. I never heard of this before, and I'm glad to know it now. But we hope you're enjoying. We're going back to our railroading. We'll try to stick more with railroads, but every time I ask a question, we get a little bit more history, but that's part of what we're doing here today, and thanks for watching.
Well, you ask.
Yes, I do.
And this is a baggage tag from the D&H, but you notice it says Champlain Division.
Oh, here's something for people from Champlain.
No, it's not.
Oh,
Champlain Division meant from Rouses Point to Port Henry was one division. From Port Henry to Whitehall was another division. So if a man had rights on the Champlain Division and he got bumped, which means he was out of a job, he couldn't take another man's job in the Saratoga Division, which was down the southern part. He had to stay in his own division. So your rights were only good in your own division. So that if you lived in Albany, somebody from Rouses Point couldn't come down and take your job away from you, even though he was older than you were. So it was a division. That's the way they divided it.
I assume that M of W does not mean men of women.
Maintenance of way.
Oh, there we go.
That's
All
a
right.
section.
A section
That's a
underneath
section.
there. Maintenance of way. And that is brass.
Yeah, it's a brass baggage tag again.
Baggage
But
tag.
it's a D&H one, like the other one you saw was
Yep.
O and LC. All right. Now this is kind of a nice picture. I don't know how much good he can pick it up, but that's Jack Dempsey
In the car?
on the end of the car.
Okay. Up
He-
here.
He came to, they were raising money for war bonds in the first war, and Jack Dempsey came on that train and he signed autographs for anybody that wanted autographs, and he gave a little spiel about why people should buy war bonds, victory bonds they called them then. And that was on the D&H.
Right next to the station, obviously,
Yes,
right?
yes, right next to the station. And when you think of what the wages today, in 1886, the D&H brakeman got $50 a month. And the firemen got 1.50 cents a mile when they worked a passenger train, and they got 1.25 cents a mile when they worked a freight. So railroad men didn't get rich.
No, they didn't. No, and they're still not getting rich with their retirement. We talked with Tom Rosenberger about that yesterday, and you'll see that in the segment on Tom. And we didn't mention money, dollars, but we mentioned that it's a counterpart of Social Security. A little bit more than Social Security, but not much.
Well, I hate to disagree with him,
All right.
but I get both. My husband was 17 years on the railroad, and now my father gets a railroad check. Tom wouldn't either. He hasn't been retired that long. My father gets a railroad check, and he gets a Social Security check, and he gets complete. He gets all his Social Security, he gets all his railroad. When I went on, my husband's railroad was combined with Social Security, and I don't get full railroad and I don't get full Social Security. They cut both of them.
Okay, so you still get
So
both. You get.
It's combined and it's all Social Security.
Okay, all right. I beg your
But
pardon.
part of it is from the railroad.
Yes, but it's a combined
It's
thing.
combined.
My mother-in-law is involved in the
Yeah.
same. And
In my
that's-
father's time, it was 2 checks. My mother got 2 checks and
Two
my
separate
father got
checks,
2
right?
checks, but that's no more. So that was just another interesting sidelight. But interesting person that I thought, there was a Prince Paul Levin from Riga, Russia. I hear it often enough on TV, Riga, Russia, that came in on the D&H, and he couldn't get through into Canada, so he stayed at the Montgomery Hotel until he got his clearance papers. There's the Montgomery Hotel. That was built in 1890.
That was right across from the station.
Yeah, you can see where the tracks are, which is the main line. It goes right across on
Right
the
over here.
south side of Pratt Street.
Oh, that's looking at. Oh, Pratt Street is. Pratt is up this way here, and this is looking from the other side. You know, we were talking about that at that early in this century, there were 3 restaurants. Counting this one.
I got that.
You got that later? 3.
Yeah.
Now there's nothing in the area
No,
of the station.
no,
You know.
and when you think,
Times change.
and besides that being there was a YMCA
Yes. Then
right
it became
next door to that.
part of Armin's.
Yeah.
Went in
Yeah.
there later.
Yeah, Armin's was from the YMCA. This burned down.
Oh, this completely burned.
Yes.
Oh, that's why I don't remember
Montgomery
seeing that.
burned. There's just an
Okay.
empty space there yet where that burned. In 1900, the Rutland and Canada Railroad came through Rouses Point and went on through to Burlington. So that was another road that came in here. 1850, the plans to connect Montreal and the St. Lawrence Railroad with Rouses Point. The road was already built from St. John's to Rouses Point. So, and it was called the Prairie St. John's. Then they called it the Champlain St. Lawrence. This is the D&H station in Lacole. Now that was hand-colored by Larry Marnes, by the way. He's a photographer, in case nobody knew it. He doesn't do it much, but he is a very good photographer. When he was in Korea, he did all the pictures for the photography.
Is that
for
right? I
The
didn't know
service.
that.
But he hand-colored that. I thought he did a great job.
Yes.
And that's a very pretty station. Now that was opened in 1851, that station opened.
Right. Now
And,
that's known as the NJ. That would be the NJ station also.
Oh yeah, the NJ
Right.
there too, but
Okay.
see, the NJ is a freight, so it doesn't stop the
Okay.
station. The NJ is just freight, it goes right past, but this is the passenger station
Okay.
for the NJ. So this railroad wanted to get through to Rouses Point, so it got to Rouses Point. So in 1852, they built a spur. And I will show it where it is on the blueprint later. They started at the station, where in the area of the station, the brick station you saw of the Rutland, and they went through right near where the Rouses Point Fire Station is. Then it cut through on State Street. There's a block called the Menard Block now. My time was Laundry Block. They cut right through the east corner of that, and they went in the water right there. And they went 20 rods out from the shore, and they built a line right up to the Mishler House today, which is almost to the Saxony. And they built a railroad line there out in the water.
Parallel with Lake Street?
Yes, yes, and 20 feet out in the water. It was 20 rods. No, I don't know what a rod is.
I think a rod is
You
16
men must
feet,
know.
16 feet, I think, for a rod.
Well, it was,
That'd be 300?
all right, it was 20 rods out, because you see, in them days, if you
300
bought property at low water mark, they had to be beyond that, because you owned, if you bought on your line went to low water, not high water like today. So they went 20 rods out in the water, on the shoreline, and they went up to what they call Leonard's Wharf. Well, Leonard's Wharf was, as I say, I don't know if you know where Andy Major lives.
Yes?
All right.
Yes.
Andy Major, Rita Mishler is the brick house right side. Right across the road, there's a spur of land there. Well, that was Leonard's Wharf. It was out on that spur. Now, the south end of that spur that went from downtown up there along the water had stone piers. When they took it apart, the stone piers were used in the state dock. They used the piers to make state dock with, so that's where they went. Now, they put tracks on those piers. They laid their ties and they put the tracks, and then they put a platform. Between the two tracks, they ran a platform, and on the outside of each track, they ran a platform. That was so the uptowners could go down to downtown, and so there was no roads. It was all just mud. So they would go out on the railroad, and they would walk the platform and go downtown on that platform. And if there was a train coming, they'd ride the outside of the platform. It was just a spur. It wasn't a main line, so there wasn't that many trains. But there was so much traffic and everything in boat traffic there that at Leonard's Wharf, it was made so the boats could come right up to the wharf and they could load and unload right from the railroad cars. And it was all done way up there.
Near the end of Champlain Street.
This way a bit.
Yeah, just barely, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where the brick house is, it was right across. Where the brick house is, there was, where Montpelier built
Yes.
his roundhouse,
Yeah.
that's where there was a roundhouse.
Yes.
Right in
There
that
was a
area, there
roundhouse
was a
there.
roundhouse there. And so that went with that brick house, and the station was out on the pier, and the railroad track went all the way down.
No pictures
So
of that, Peggy, that you
that's-
know of
no,
exist?
No, I don't believe there is.
That'd be something to see.
Yeah,
No,
but I don't
never heard.
think there was such a thing. Well, anyway, it was there 5 years. At the end of 5 years, they abandoned it because, again, it was in the time when the traffic was slowing up and the fort was being stopped and so on, so they didn't need it. So it didn't prove to be much good, so they abandoned that in 5 years. So David Mandigo bought the whole thing. He bought the whole tracks, and he bought the station and the roundhouse. He bought it all, and for scrap. So he took the ties off, and he took the rails off, and some of the piers, if it's a low water yet today, there's a couple of boats have hit a couple of the piers that are still down in there, almost like in front of Casey's. There would be. So that's the piers are still there. So that's all we've got to prove it is that there's Randy Mishler always told me that on his deed it mentions that railroad, but he was always going to show me. But in the end, Randy passed away, and I never did get to see the deed to know what it said on it. But if it's on his deed, it apparently would be somewhere. There'd be something in the courthouse. So someday I'll dig. I may find something yet. So anyway, that was removed. So then the O&LC bought the house where Rita Mishler lives, the brick house, from the railroad, and they put their agent in there. And then in later years, the Grand Trunk owned it, and they used it for their agents. And again, the last agent that was there was Charles Malloy, Paul Malloy's father. That was where his home was. He worked down the yard office, or the freight office, CN, but that was his home. So he was right there.
Now, they own the property just across, up south of there now, right? That the laundry property where the gas station was, and that Malloy's own that now? They were part of the laundry estate?
Yes, yes.
So they
yeah.
kind of...
But it wasn't the same deal.
No, but
How
what goes around
Malloy's-
comes around there.
How Malloy's got that is because Paul Malloy married a laundry.
Yes,
And
but
that was laundry property.
Nearly adjoining properties now
Yeah,
from what way back, I know.
But Malloy didn't own the building. His railroad set him in there as a tenant. Malloy never owned it.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, that's where they put their agent. So the Malloys didn't own property up there. The laundries did,
Mm-hmm.
but Malloy's didn't. But of course, Paul's wife is Dot Malloy.
Mm-hmm.
So she was Dot Laundry.
Okay, not, Rita's my cousin, so I know where she lives, but not everybody knows where Rita Mitchell lives. I really
Okay.
established where that is.
Okay.
Christine's garage.
When you make the corner coming off Champlain Street, with this actually you turn left, the second house on the left
Yeah.
is a big brick house with 4 apartments behind it now. And that's where Montpelier had his cabins. That's the area right across the road from there. There's a little, it's where the ice nearly is. When
Yes, yes.
You saw ice next to where Laundry had his.
Little
It's just
gas
north
station.
of the old mobile station where Laundry had it, correct?
Yeah.
North, maybe 300 feet north of our 1816 stone house that you showed us there,
Yes,
the
yes.
store.
Yeah, yeah, that's right in that area. So that point of land after belonged to Fairbanks, who owned Andrew Major's house. That was a Fairbanks property, so they kind of bordered each other. But that's the area we're talking about. So that line went out, and there was nothing more of that. Now this map shows it some. I'll find it for you because now let me show you, and then you can put it up and show it. Here's where the station would be, and it comes into Rouses Point, and here's where it turns, and here, this is the lake. Here's where it's going on up.
Right along that goes across to Vermont, right?
No,
It must be here. Here it is, right
yeah,
here.
Yeah,
There
see,
it is, okay.
It goes right down here, and there would be Leonard's Wharf,
Okay.
right there.
Got you now, all right. We see here the village of Rouses Point, all the way through here. The Rutland came in like this, the D&H crossed it, and what Peg is saying is, right, this is Lake Street right along here, and this is where the railroad was, out in the water, and came right up to, and this is where that Leonard's area was, and that's where the roundhouse was. And Windmill Point, of course, is across over in Vermont. But it was right along here. And I'm not sure, I thought a rod was 16 feet, that'd be 300 feet out, and a rod may not be 16 feet. I thought it was. I'll try and check that before we
don't
finish
know.
here.
This is Rita Mischler's house.
Okay,
Now,
this is the house.
That's the
That-
agent's, railroad
Wait.
agent's house.
And that is on the west side of the road, and the motel was located right over here, just to the north, and this is Route 9B right here. Directly across the street was this Leonard's Wharf.
Now this, we talked about Canada and Atlantic. This is a nice old timer. This is a waybill. And on the other side, the Rouses Point stamp is on it. So that proves that it did
Yeah.
come to Rouses Point
A
again.
waybill is strictly a record of what's on a train, right?
A waybill is what's given to say I brought a box of crackers and I wanted it sent. I would get a copy of the waybill, and the railroad people would copy the waybill. When I went to pick it up, or whoever went to pick it up, they would go in and they'd tell them it's number such and such waybill, and they'd look it up. Then they know how much the express and the freight or whatever was.
This is the Soo line, the Canada Atlantic fast freight line. And one of the things I signed yesterday in order to get permission to get onto the D&H property, it mentioned the Soo line. And we made a little joke of it, that the SOO was so that we would not SUE them in case something happened to us on the premises when we walked around the property.
Oh, yeah.
The Soo line, I didn't know what the Soo line was in reference to. It had to do with the D&H along the way.
And that's one of the Canada and Atlantic engines. See, their engines were real pretty. They kept them spruced right up,
Yep.
and they were real pretty engines.
Now, I learned something looking through a railroad book the other day I got from the library, and you count the wheels. There's 2, 4, there's 2, 4, and 2. So this, when you list this on an engine, it would be known as a 4-4-2, 4-4-2. There's 4 little ones, 4 big ones and then 2 little ones in the back of that. And they all vary. It could be 2, 4, 2, 2, 6, 2, it could be whatever. And these are the drive wheels that are large ones. The rest of them more or less just keep it in line. There's your tender, and it's number 618.
And we talked today about the smuggling and everything and so much going on. In 1925, Jim Yale, whom I remember also, he caught 2 men that had $60,000 worth of cocaine, and they had it in 550 cocoa cans, and a trunk and a package.
In 1920?
In 1925. And they had smuggled it across. He got him at Alberg. They'd got on the train in Ellenburg, and he was a D&H, I think he was D&H cop. I'm not sure what his position was, but he routed those men, and at Alberg, when they got off, he was right there, and about $60,000 worth of cocaine.
Wow,
so it's not just today.
He got off in Alberg, and we're getting off right here in the town garage for a little break, and we'll be right back to you. Bob Venne with What's Going On Here, our second week of railroading in the northern tier. Peg Barcomb, our guest. We just got back on the train, and we're arriving in the city of Plattsburgh. Peg, tell us about Plattsburgh.
Well, that's just a nice station, too, and that's a picture of the Plattsburgh station with the 4K house in the back. That's a very nice station. A lot of the little towns don't have big stations, but that's a real big station.
So many people haven't seen this view of the railroad station. This is the back where the trains are, and of course Bridge Street runs between these 2 buildings, and it's out on that point where you can see the water, and you can see all the different tracks and the various sidings here.
And you see there's much more than a main line there.
Oh yes, you want to believe it. A lot of the cars, and then of course there was the yard was down in this area over here, and the main route went down and headed south toward Cliff Haven. Nice picture. And right today, where this property is located, I don't think that's the that's not the MP Myers building. I think that's where they're doing the car windows now. I forget the name of the company. Right across from the station. Of course, the station been made into some stores and some restaurants since then, and isn't as busy as it was then.
But at least they've kept its outside identity.
You know,
So that's
yes.
a good part of it.
I got to take 3 minutes and tell you a story about 1946 when I graduated from high school. The spring before, during Easter vacation, Mr. Marr, another chaperone, and someone's counting to see how old I am, and anyway, Mr. Marr and we were 9 in our class. We're going down for our class trip, and we stopped at the Plattsburgh station, and I said, I'm going to run in and get a paper. So I ran in, and they told me I had 10 minutes. I ran in to get a paper, and I took more than 5 minutes, came out, and all I saw was the caboose going around the corner about 500 feet to the east, heading out toward Cliff Haven and Point, New York, and all my luggage is on it, and nobody knows that I'm not on the train. So I didn't know what to do. I was 17 years old, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Never left the county before. So I ran in and I told them, and they said, well, why don't you jump in a taxi? So we jumped in a taxi out in front, and he drove like mad down Route 9, and when we went under the underpass out near Cliff Haven, the train was right above us. And we went down to just below that where you cross over into West Plattsburgh. Mm-hmm. And there's a water tower where they had to fill up with water. And I immediately jumped out of the taxi, paid the taxi, and got on the front of the train and started walking to the back. And when I first got back to the group, they would not believe that I had really done what I told them I had done. And immediately Mr. Marr, he'll remember this, put a sign on me and said, if lost, return to so-and-so hotel in New York City. And that's one of my boo-boos back when I was just growing up. Go back to you, Peg.
That's kind of interesting.
So I've
story.
seen that that side of the tracks.
Yeah. This is one of our famous snowstorms in 1925. Now that's an engine sitting on the track, completely buried in snow.
They're standing on top of the engine.
They're standing on top, trying to unbury the thing. Now that was between Beauvin's restaurant and the border. So it was near the Y, near the Diamond, just a bit past the Diamond that this was. Now when that happened, I remember my father telling it so well. Of course, I was 1 year old, but I remember my father often tells us that that he lived in a house way down near the Rouses Point, Vermont bridge. And we lived in a house way down there. And knock at the door in the morning, and he went to the door, and he said that when he went to the door, he said he couldn't believe it. That here's Hector Como, who was a section boss on the CN, and he's standing in snow up to his waist, and he wanted to know if my father wanted to come to work to help to shovel out the railroad. So he said he dressed, and he said he had to fight and buck that snow all the way. That's how. Now this was on the level, the snow up to his waist. So Mrs. Fitch was running the restaurant where Benny Arno lives today. That was made for the Fitch restaurant. Louis Valenzi, who was the section boss, came into the restaurant, and he said, anybody that wants to work, get a shovel and come on out to work. And he said to Mrs. Beauvais, make me sandwiches of everything you got that you can throw together. And so she took a couple of the men that were in there, and they helped her, and they made up sandwiches and soup and milk and everything she had, and they carried it down to the train, because this was the passenger train. It was stalled down there. They had heat, but there was no diner. So they brought all the food that they could gather down there, and they worked around the clock until they could free that train so it could get out and get up through to the station. So now that was one storm. So when we say we have snow today, we don't have any snow today. And I mean, this is in my father's time, and he tells that story yet. He went and helped dig out some of those engines and dig out those people.
That was 1925?
25.
I want to remind you that we're at the town garage building, and we're in the meeting hall of the town government here, and the noise you heard in the background is the door. There's activities here in the town building. Your town money at work here, and the two ladies sitting over next to me aren't getting much of it. Across from us here, but they're listening in as we talk, and they're doing some town records, and that was the door opening into the main office you just heard. And if you heard some noises, we ask your indulgences for that little bit, but we continue as the government continues here in the town hall.
Now this is a wreck that happened August 1st, 1903 at Coopersville.
Ah yes, the famous Cooperville.
The bridge was left open.
You better go back a little bit more. There's no bridge there now, Peg, and you might tell us what you're talking about.
It was a bridge. It was a railroad bridge. It still has to be there, or there would be no track there.
Yeah, but it didn't open. Put it that way.
No, it doesn't. But where you cross over the river in Coopersville is where the bridge was a drawbridge, and it was left open. The train come along, of course, and didn't know the bridge was open, and so not knowing the bridge was open, the signal wasn't up telling them so. Somebody goofed up somewhere, and so the train went right off into the water. And these views show the rubble from the cars just breaking itself apart and so on. And no one was hurt.
Amazing.
I have a copy of the Hancock diary. Edith Moss, the Shazy historian, has his original diaries, and he was the station agent in Cooperville, which, by the way, there was 2 stations in Cooperville, railroad stations. One burned down, and they brought the one from Altona and put it in its place. And this Mr. Hancock took care of that. He was there, and he was there until the telegraph come in, and then he couldn't learn that or didn't want to learn it, and so he resigned. So he tells about this wreck, how he took his little daughter by the hand, and they went over there and stood and watched as they started to clean out this wreck.
As you head south and go through Cooperville, you cross the car bridge, regular for automobiles, and then you take the first turn to your left to go down towards Shazy Landing, and down about 500 feet, 800 feet, you remember, you cross the tracks, and just to your left, you would see this view right here. This is looking east as you go down that road, and I think there's been several other accidents there, not necessarily train accidents, but a couple of bad car accidents. Mr. Heinert and one of the Bidor boys had a very bad accident and were killed right within 300 feet of here. Ward Dwight's daughter fell off these stones up here. A train was coming, he had to jump in, and she landed on the rock down below and was very severely injured. So it wasn't a train wreck. And here's where you see some of the trucks being pulled up. I say trucks, remember that's the wheels underneath the cars being pulled up, back up.
You're learning.
I'm learning here. Well, you can't sit here for the hour we've been together, Peg, or the hours, and not learn something. And you see here's a car that's half over. But you would think that with the engine, with someone in the engine, that someone would have got hurt when the engine went in.
They didn't.
They did not get
See,
hurt.
it's not deep there. It's not like it's a big deep ravine. So they had a little bit of protection because of that.
He stopped very quickly, I'll say that for him. But the reason it was open, they had a drawbridge then, because there was a lot of boat traffic
yes.
going into Champlain, where they had more or less a canal that came out, and they built boats, and there was barges up and down that river, much more navigable than it is today.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And so we got Cooperville in the story.
Now this is a picture, it's 1909, and you can see the sign. The railroad shared the offices. That was the D&H offices, and they rented to other railroads because they didn't need the whole thing. Now this building would have been on Pratt Street, and it would have been east of the driveway that you see now by the D&H station. Well, right at the end of that driveway was this building, and it was taken down. I think Harold Laundrie took it down. I remember it coming down, but I'm pretty sure it was Harold Laundrie.
I think Harold Laundrie did, and as a matter of fact, I mentioned wood one day, and it had wainscoting inside of there, and the next day he came over with his little truck and brought me numerous pieces of 12 foot and 18 feet long wainscoting that came out of that building, so I think he did take it down.
He's taken a lot of buildings down, so I said, I may be wrong, it might not have been him, but I think it was him.
He's got the wood anyway.
But anyway, the people in that picture is Harry Goodrow, Pearlie Rock, Bill Brothers, William Lighthall, R. Hill, Henry Sotheby, George Ingalls, William Gray, Fred Hanfield, John Poirier, L. Burrett, and in the front is J. Govro.
Those were local Rouses Pointers in that time, right? All in that time.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of descendants and people there now. And just another part of the history of railroading in the village in Rouses Point, the town of Champlain.
So then they all moved out of that building. The railroads all moved out of there, and the D&H went over to the Delaware House. Now, the Delaware House is right here. It's the only picture I know of the Delaware House. I know it's not too good, but it'd give you an idea of the size of it.
The Delaware is over here on the left, you said, way over here at the Delaware House.
See, during the ice season, when everybody was trying to make ice and send it and ship it and so on, anyone that had any money was building up buildings and thinking they were going to be real prosperous. And so this man named Sheldon built this place, and he built it for a hotel, and it was the Delaware House, which was the second Delaware House. The first one was, I told you, where the D&H station was. He built this as a hotel. Well, it all fell through, and his money didn't last, so it was empty. So when the D&H station, these men decided from the D&H office that they were going to move because the immigration was going to use that building, they went over into the old Delaware House. Is where the D&H went. And they stayed there for quite some time, and the immigration office moved into the former D&H office building on Pratt Street. So when you came from Canada, you came down Charlie White's Corners, which is 276, and you came down to Pratt Street. Now I don't know what the number of that route is from Charlie White's to Pratt Street. I don't know, but anyway, if you went up the end of Pratt Street, you turned towards Canada and up in that street, and you went to Charlie White's Corners, which is at the end of 276 with Canada. Well, you came through there, you got to this D&H building, and you had to stop for the immigration. And after you cleared the immigration, you got back in your car and you went down to the Myers building for the customs. So it was like that until they built the customs at 9B. And when they built the customs at 9B, well, then it all was put in the one. But there was no good road going through 9B, so you had to come through Charlie White's Corners. So then the D&H moved back into their own building. And that other building, that Delaware house, was taken down. It was rented for apartments for a while, and then eventually it just folded up and that was taken down. Now that picture, the first person, I don't know. Maybe somebody does. The First Lady. The second one is Dot Malloy. Now these people all worked in the yard offices there too, with those men that we saw the picture before. There's Dot Malloy, there's Albert Carrier, there's Arthur Brothers, there's Willis Miller, and Arthur Bullis. Now again, it's all local men and women. The first one, I'm not sure who she is. I'm sure Dot Malloy will know, and she'll probably let me know.
Okay, Dot, if you're watching this, make sure you let Peg know that so we can add it to her records, and we'll add it to ours one of these days.
Now, on the railroad, they used to have the sleepers. To us, that was 7 and 9. The passenger was 34 and 35. Well, 7 and 9 was the sleeper. And at one time, this Mr. McKnight that wrote this little book told me that he stood and watched the sleeper going south with 13 sleeper cars. Now that's a lot of people for one train that were going through, and he said that he watched that on the D&H. 13 sleeper cars go through.
We're going to take a break here just about now. We're just about finished for this week's program. But before we do, let's make the last thing as we close. We'll show you the inside of a sleeper car. Here's a double-decker sleeper car. And all these people with their heads out of their sleepers is because they're on the Canadian frontier. A customs officer at Rouses Point searching baggage on a night train. Madam, is there anything dutiable in this bag? He's asking the lady, and she's in her, I guess I don't know if you'd call them curlers then, but they were comparable. And you have the man coming along with the customs officer, and that's from the Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper, February 10th, 1883, a drawing. And that's what happened.
This is the actual newspaper. A fellow that's a bookseller out in Wisconsin. He knows anything he gets at this area, he lets me know. And he wrote and told me he had this, and so I bought it. And believe it or not, I paid $20 for that sheet of paper. It's worth it.
There's a lot of paper here, and you're seeing a lot of this paper. We were finishing up our second segment of railroading in the northern tier, particularly Rouses Point. That's the hub. And the person who knows all this and keeping us posted and very interesting stories and sidelights is Peg Barcomb, the town historian. You're watching What's Going On Here, and we're finished for this week. We hope you'll tune in next week for a continuation of this very interesting story of railroading. I'm Bob Venne. Thank you much for watching every Sunday night on our program at 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 1 a.m., and 9 the following morning. And every night you watch Hometown Cable on Channel 21, the weather station, known as Calvin's station too now because of all the great programs he puts on. Thanks much for watching, and tune in again next week for a continuation. We hope you'll tune in this coming Sunday night and watch the continuation of myself with Peg Barcomb, our historian, talking about railroading in the northern tier. You'll hear about this building here, and you'll find out who all these fine people are. Have you seen any of these people lately? If you haven't seen them, or if you want to know who they are, tune in this coming Sunday night at 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, or 9 the following morning, in the continuing mini-series of railroading in northern New York, in the northern county, the northern tier, and particularly in and around Rouses Point, New York. It's interesting. If you like railroads, tune in. Tell all your friends and neighbors. And if you're recording it, make sure you have your recorder on. So we'll see you then, right? This coming Sunday night.